Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the batch video for the web novel Thieves Dungeon from the website Royal Road. This video will contain chapters 0.13 to 0.15, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 0.13, Just Like That. Morgul placed a leaf in a cup of water and held it in his hands on either side of it, sending a faint thread of mana into the makeshift compass. The leaf spun slowly wobbling to the point northwards, and he nodded. Not far now. Strix shook her head. My owls say that'll be a long time yet. She wore an ochre sundress, high leather boots, and a broad-brimmed hat. A tawny little owl with dark spots perched on her sun hat's edge, staring out at the bright amber eyes. Well, damn, Morgul squinted at the augury, giving the leaf a prod with his ringed finger. Sure enough, it swayed back to where it had been pointing. Never heard of your owls getting it backwards, but I've also never had my augury steer me wrong either. Let's keep going. The future's only something to meet, Strix said, her blind gaze focusing on nothing in particular. I am voting to follow the person who can actually see. The thief had yet to give her name, but she was a grey-haired and carried herself with pride and a noble. She had become Lady Grey to the rest of the group, and she wore a little cap with a dark veil and riding clothes, wielding a long rapier and a half-dozen knives strapped to her belt. Sounds good to me. Olkaz brought up the rear, barely able to squeeze himself into the sewer tunnels by walking on his knuckles in an awkward lope. A pair of throwing axes smacked against his segmented greaves, armoring his legs. He was in full plate, battered and dented, and anything but shining. A bizarre and oversized knight. Funny, I thought we were still sensible adults, and yet everyone has voted to ignore the damn seer. Morgul stroked his beard in concern. Damn it. But all right, let's walk right into trouble. Through Adamant's blurry eye, the argent lurching seasick perspective, I had no clear sight of the attackers, but I saw looked like an orange flames darting under the waters, slamming into Clayman's sides and harassing me. I could almost laugh. They were dire goldfish. Although not particularly dangerous, without the claws or teeth, the hunting strategy was clear. Bludgeon their prey down into the water and hold them there until they drowned. And while the golem wouldn't be drowning anytime soon, atop its head, Arjun was struggling not to be swept off into the lake. Adamant swept his hands through the water, trying clumsily to seize the assailants. They neatly evaded with a flicking of their trailing fins and slammed into him again from behind. He tripped forward, and Arjun went splashing into the water. Instantly, one of the fish broke off to attack her instead, its dorsal fin scratching through the water as it shot towards the albino rodent. At the last second, even as the giant fish lifted its head above the water to sweep down towards Argent with the mouth wide open, Isis dropped out of the sky, sinking his little talons into the beast's sides and kicking his wings, managing to hold off a crucial moment. Isis let go, and in the same instant, Adamant's club-like hand came crashing down. The goldfish was smashed towards the bottom of the lake, killed instantly. Another fish slammed into his legs, sending the giant clayman down to his knees beneath the water. The rest of the school surrounded him, making battering ram runs at the blunt skulls, kicking him in the tails. And all the while, Argent was struggling to stay afloat with her 3 legs. Isis grabbed her by the back and tried to pull her up, but it was too late. Beneath him, orange shadows were looming, growing bigger and bigger as it rose towards the surface. In an instant before Isis could pull his friends free, there was a splashing explosion of water, a snap of jaws, and Argent was gone, swallowed whole. Adamant froze in the waters and lunged for the fish, but it deftly wove in between the clumsy giant's hands. Then I realized I could still hear Argent's mind within my own, and she was trying to tell me something. I sent a frantic order, "Arms up!" and the obedient Adamant reached out of his arms as the silver flash of light. The goldfish was teleported out the water directly and into his grasp. Seizing it in both hands, my golem wrung it like a damn fish towel until it coughed up a slime-covered, bedraggled rat. My rat. Adamant caught her in one hand, and then, with as much anger as an expressionless, faceless golem could show, Adamant wound up like a pitcher and hurled the fish clear onto the horizon. Holding his friend in one hand and stretched out high, Clayman continued across the lake. The fish frightened off with two dead, scattering back to the murky edges of the deep crevices of the water. Their goal was nothing more than trees at the far end. Setting his friend down, Adamant went back to the water to fetch the dead fish, while Isis picked up the beetles and bugs that he thought might interest me. But the true goal of the expedition were the seeds that Argent scampered up to fetch from the high branches. Adamant, Argent, and Isis returned as conquering heroes. I dismissed them back to playing with a wave of goodwill and dissolved the fish corpse, then the samples that they had brought, studying each carefully as I devoured them layer by layer. Ah, yes, there was potential here. One of the beetles Isis had brought back had a unique ability to spray phosphorescent chemicals, building nests of hardened, glowing spittle to attract their mates. I could work with that. Another interesting bug was a flat larvae with the potential to evolve into a giant mosquito the size of a cat. Hideous, but deadly. But most of all, the goldfish specimen was promising. Due to its remarkable simplicity, there was almost no size that it couldn't grow to, which meant that if I could feed it enough mana, I could make a true leviathan. Since most defenders I had so far were rather small and relied on stealth or numbers, it was a rather interesting prospect. I couldn't just throw a canopy of stone to enclose the lake, but the mangrove trees were already there. If I planted more of them and tangentially interwove the branches, I could make a ceiling thick enough to contain my mana, allowing my influence to extend across the lake instead of dispersing into the open air. Since it seemed like few people cared about this lonely edge of the city where the sewers poured out, it would likely be a while before the expansion of my domain became too noticeable. By then I'd hoped to have burrowed down and began my next floor. But now, I only had the mana to plant and nourish a few seeds around the breach of my walls. I would need to up my income before I could properly expand. It seemed like there was always some new siphon for my mana, and never enough coming in. Gems. I longed for beautiful, sparkling jewels, hidden away in the dark corners, never to be seen again by human eyes. I wanted a hoard that would make a dragon envious. And oh, I wasn't going to sit idly back and just dream of such riches. No, I had a plan. I only needed a few more days. As it turned out, time was something else I would never have enough of. When it happened, I was working with something new. I was steadily hollowing out a thin crawl space above the gardens, leaving short columns to stabilize the shallow, new caverns hidden above the main chamber of my dungeon. I had started to discover that I could make stone stronger by simply feeding it a little mana, producing something stronger than steel with just a fraction of the point per square inch. That let me work on the stone in ways that I hadn't before, carving out barely there false ceilings above the gardens. My goal, of course, was traps. Without complex mechanical know-how, I'd relied on simple pitfalls so far. But now, I had an idea that would let me go further. I would take a trapdoor spider and give it a perfect hiding space within the ceiling. Moreover, I'd integrate a little glow beetle's abilities, teaching the spider to spin luminescent, dazzling webs into the hiding spaces, so that in a moment the trapdoor opened, the unfortunate victim would be stunned by the attunement of Gleam's hypnotic effects. This was all ways in the future, but I was proud of the concept. With hidden passages above and below the gardens, I could both defend them if need be, or pretend there was just another mushroom-ridden corner of the sewers. Deception in action. That was when a spell slammed into the sealed-off end of the tunnels. I don't know if it had ever been in a dungeon core and it had a spell cast within your domain, but let me assure you, don't be. It flat sucks. My being was a warp and welter mana within my territory. A spell seizes the mana to twist someone else's purpose. Do you know what it's like? It's like having a bully hold you down and declare stop hitting yourself as he beats you with your own fists. The spell ripped into the stone blockade that I put up, causing them to melt like the flow of water. With a little application of the magician's willpower, and a circular tunnel was bored into the formerly solid rock. And through stepped 4 adventurers, each of them enough to send shivers down my spine. An enormous brute of a knight, a mysterious lady, and a diminutive and exotic priest. And at the head of them, a dwarf who made a storm current swirl within the manor around him, bending it to his will and simply by existing. Adamant was the closest to the breach. He stepped forward to defend me on pure instinct, and that was the only mistake he got to make. The giant knight stepped forward and backhanded him with a tremendous sweeping haymaker that tore Adamant's upper body clean in half. Mud, torn, and roots sprayed across the walls as the disembodied legs sunk into the ground. Just like that. Gone. The ogre let out a mean little chuckle that could have made my blood run cold with fury, if I had blood at all. Easy, easy. This should be it then, the dwarf said. Then let's begin. Reaching into a bag, the priest pulled out a stick of incense and lit it with a flame that danced in the palm of her hand. As the smoke wreathed up in the air and the burning stick, I felt suddenly constricted, my mana out of control, my senses growing blurry. By God's will, you will be restricted, she intoned. A strange feeling of mental weight pressed down upon my mind. Let all the license be revoked. As long as this incense burns, let the challenge be met without interference. Be sealed. Just like that, I was helpless. The only thing that I could do was reach out to Arjun through the shared bond. We have to get that incense, I told her. And we didn't have much time to do it, because the adventurers were walking through my dungeon like it was a stroll in the park. End of chapter. Chapter 0.14. First Contact. The group huddled in around their leader. Take these. Morgul had out of 4 rings in his palm of his hand. Each was a band of silver carved with a single rune. The word of return. If you're at risk of dying, it'll pull you back to the Magician's Institute. Can't guarantee they'll save your life, but you'll certainly have better odds there. One by one they took the rings, except Olcaz. The ogre made a few futile attempts to jam the little band of silver over his thick fingers, before handing it back with a shrug. I just won't die. And Morgul couldn't help but notice Lady Grey only pretended to put hers on, before slipping it into her pocket. All right then, your funeral. Lady Grey, lead the way. Morgul shrugged, no skin of his nose if they wanted to play it risky. There and there, the lady pointed out with 2 sections in the ground, and Olcaz was-lipped him with the spike of his back of his axe, breaking through a thin layer of earth disguising a pit trap. As he broke the second one puff of golden spores shot up, covering the ogre. Everyone froze, waiting for him to keel over, with Olcaz just sneeze. Divine wind! Lifting her hand, Strix sent out a wave of golden wind that surrounded them. Drifting spores were simply pushed away as they advanced. They wove through the ground and Lady's instruction, bypassing the small field of pitfalls. Colorful and glowing mushrooms crunched under their boots as they advanced. Pretty, Morgul noted. The compass in his hand was ticking slowly to the west. It's clearly intelligent. They stood in a wide cavern, a floor carpeted in a bubbling, frilled shapes of fungi life, in every color imaginable. Fat puffballs exploded into slime as Olcaz strode forward with his head of the group, stomping with glee at the crooked stems and flat-headed, the ear-shape and the multicolored, wisp-thin and the translucent as glass. Sniffling as the air, he bent down and plucked a scarlet-colored cup from the ground, popping it between his crooked teeth and chewing. He turned to find the entire group staring at him in horror. What? It tastes good. Delicious, Olcaz said, mouth full still. Sort of small dungeon, no? The lady commented. It was best just to change the subject from the wild stupidity they'd just seen. This one was retrieved and bound before it matured. I am surprised it hasn't mind at all. Morgul said slowly. It was bothering him, actually. A dungeon core harvested before it was fully grown should be crippled even if escaping its bindings, left as a simple automaton that spat out its own creations and dug itself deeper endlessly. Nobody would risk wearing a sentient mana rift on their fingers. Or was Odin really that insane? I boiled with helpless anger as I listened to them. The brute was stomping through my gardens with stupid glee. The woman had evaded my defences with ease. As for the two short stuffs lurking in the back, I knew that they were magical and had no idea what their capabilities ended. In short, I felt distinct, nauseating fear. I was not prepared for this. My creations were barely finding their footing in this world, and already I was under the pressure of some forces far stronger than me. The incense! I forced myself to focus. I needed to get that incense stick away from them. Now think. Think! Lady Grey paused suddenly. The whole group lurched to a halt behind her. In the blink of an eye, she leapt backwards as a viper shot the mushroom fields. Its teeth extended, its camouflage skin becoming visible as it burst into motion. It caught nothing but air where she had been and hurled a knife, the dagger striking the serpent's midsection and pinning it to the earth as they thrashed in dying pain. Lady Grey panted slightly, her eyes wide. That had been too close. All around them the little garden began to writhe. She drew another knife from her belt and flung it, killing another. Holkaz stooped forward with his axes and swept the ground around them bare with a scathing blow, ensuring nothing could creep up on them. And Morgul began to weave complex knotted signs with his fingers, each motion creating another thread of golden light, until he had woven a complex and shining diagram on the space between his hands. In the center of the solitary flame bloomed into existence. "Stand clear!" he shouted, as the flame sprouted into a jet of raging blue flame, spraying off sparks as he drew it along the ground. Instantly, the garden around them was reduced to smouldering ruins, mushrooms hissing and bursting as the water within them heated to steam. Any serpents caught by his spray were reduced to burnt charcoal-black things, writhing as they were consumed. It took a few seconds for the cavern to be stiflingly hot, and forever changed. The earth was dried and black with ash. But in those few seconds, the hissing roar of the fire was so overpowering that nobody saw Lady Grey's eyes jump to the ceiling, or heard her shout, "Above us!" Argent ran through the narrow chamber and carved into the gardens, letting me guide her until she was directly overhead of the invading party. "Now!" I commanded, and she jumped, flickering through the walls into the midair and the four intruders. She turned herself as she fell, jumping again before her feet even touched the ground, and landed on the masked priest's shoulder. Before the girl could even blink, the incense stick had been snatched from her hands, and then Argent was gone in a flash of silver. Frick! Lady Grey threw a knife and went wide of the rat vanished midair, reappearing on the ground and taking off like a silver streak. Another knife flew from her hand, but this one missed as well. There was a flash of silver light, and the rat leapt from one point in space to another in the blink of an eye, leaving a trail like a lightning bolt in her wake. Swearing violently, the Lady Grey lunged after, drawing her rapier as she chased the rat towards the sunlight pouring in from the breach in the walls. A brown flash shot over her shoulder. The priest's owl burst into motion, wings beating as it swooped down with talons extended. The grey blur crashed into it from the side. A tiny bat-headed homunculus seized a hold of the owl's right wing and sent it spiraling into a tailspin. The thief dashed past them both as they crashed into the ground and began to squabble. The rat was vaulting up the roots of the great black tree that grew into the breach, leaping over the top of the hill to go sailing into the open air of the daylight. She was headed right for the lake. But the lady was faster. Her rapier sung as it pierced through the air to skewer the troublesome rodent. "Got you, Lady Grey's words ended in a sudden, breathless gluck as a branch of the tree swung around and caught her across the throat, with enough force to lift her off her boots and the ground. The feet kicked in midair as she was hoisted up, wooden tendrils widening in their way around her neck and squeezing down into the soft flesh. Her face turned dark with the trapped blood. Her lips were bared in a wild, terrified snarl. Her hand struggled to find her pocket, to slip the ring hidden inside. There was a blue light as descended from the ceiling, and then she was gone. And below, Argent splashed into the lake with the incense stick clutched in her jaws. Freedom! I could have sung with joy as the incense-binding spell ended. As my mind was unclouded and my will freed, I had vengeance to do. I reached out. Living creatures had to feel the magic around them that repelled my own, making it impossible to eat them without killing them first, making it impossible to directly mutate or twist the bodies of those who invaded my dungeon. But one of them had made a mistake. He had eaten my mushroom, taking creations of my mana into his body. I reached for the spark with my own power within him. I made it grow. "I don't feel so good," Holker suddenly said, his face blanching white. "I feel stomachache." The ogre clutched his belly as Mogul turned to tell him that it was his own damn fault for eating that mushroom. The ogre leaned forward and spat up a root. It shot out of his throat, turning back and crawling along his face as it grew and grew. "I feel sick." Another spout of green was widening its way from under his eye. More and more creeping tendrils grew from his nose and mouth, forcing his jaws open. A deluge of thready vines pouring out from the edges of his eyes and making them bulge. The skin on his face began to writhe as roots pressed up from beneath. And before their eyes the hulking giant fell to his knees and was consumed by greenery, turning into a frozen statue beneath 1,000 vines. He stood and fought weakly, slowly twitching as the last tortured life faded. All that remained was a mound of piled vines. Not even the rough shape of Volkaz was visible beneath them. "Oh," Strix said, her voice shaking. "Right. Time to end this," Mogul snapped. He was heading right for me. I'd long since closed the door to my sanctum, hidden the only entrance in the heart of a flooded underground labyrinth. None of it mattered. He knew where I was, and he placed his hand on a thin stone wall separating us. A flash of magic twisted through the wrap and weave of my mana as the wall simply cracked open. Like an eggshell, dust and rubble it cascaded into the bottom of my sanctum, and the wizard strode through the breach. End of chapter. Chapter 0.15 Overflow. Mogul stepped into the sanctum. Faint shivers of blue light held him up as he simply walked on thin air, climbing an invisible staircase. A scent of waves of aggression, and the centipedes crawling the walls responded, throwing themselves down to attack him, suicidally angered by his presence in the lair, but none of them could touch him. A golden barrier sprung up around him, rippling as it flickered with their writhing bodies away. Nothing could touch him. He rose into the alcove at the top of the sanctum, barely large enough for him to find his footing. A room was curled up in the dark, lurking, waiting, ready to give his life. I told him no. I pleaded with him not to. I had a last-ditch idea. "Oh, you are a pretty thing, ain't you? You'll be fine with my collection." The dwarf cooed, as if he was a dumb animal that could be calmed with the right tone of voice. His eyes burned with greed as he stepped forward. I pulled every drop of mana that I could and into the smallest possible space, compressing it. His eyebrows raised, and he stepped forward, drawing a curved knife from his belt and splitting open his thumb. A bead of ruby blood welled from the cut. He was going to make a contract with me, a slave contract, one to steal my mana, my will, my thoughts, to turn me into nothing more than a battery. I would die first. As he stepped forward, I drew in everything. I ate the corpses of the ogre and the little creatures that all died in the burning of the gardens, ate the fertile ash of the mushrooms, ate the remains of adamant, his mana-rich clay, which the corpse had dissolved into nothing. A plume of mana rose like a pail of invisible smoke, then rushed towards my core. I drank in the energy until I reached my limit and soared beyond. The ethereal mana in my core started to condense, to collapse into a dancing flame. As then a very deep warp and weave of mana around us pooled inwards, the golden warding spell surrounding the mage suddenly flickered out like a candle in the wind. A whirlpool of forming a maelstrom of mana, draining everything in sight, draining the power from his enchanted rings, stealing the magic words from his lips. "You are experiencing mana overflow. Due to you exceeding your maximum mana by a factor of 2, mana will be expended to create a new and random blessing for your dungeon. you will be left between 50 and 0% of your maximum mana. There was no mana left to fuel his spells, no mana left to see him by. In the instant before everything went dark and I was blind, helpless, I saw a rum rear up in the shadows, hissing, and spray out the caustic venom to shoot out of his mouth and spatter over the dwarf's eyes. A hideous scream of pain was the last thing I knew before the overflow rendered me unconscious. Morgul froze as the mana in the air was pulled away from him, denying him of his magic. It was the same as the flame deprived of oxygen, a sudden exhaustion, and his spellwork simply crumbled. His sword and shield were gone. He lunged forward in desperation, tried to touch the blood on his thumb to the core, but it was too late. A hiss sounded from the shadows, and a dark shape uncoiled. Something wet splattered against his eyes, and everything went white with a searing wave of pain. He felt the acid dig into the soft tissue of his eyes. He felt himself blinded, going reeling back in shock. The pain shot through his neck, and the snake lunged and sank its teeth into the meat of his throat. He stumbled backwards, clutching his face, battered at the snake with his hands, and suddenly there was no ground under his back foot. Morgul felt his stomach twist in horror as he fell. The dwarf struck against the wall 3 times, the razor spikes and ridges tearing into his flesh. He tumbled like a broken doll and crashed into the flooded stalactite-lined floor of the sanctum, a long spear of stone tearing through his chest and beneath the heart. Ribbons of blood flowed into the water. A rum clung to his throat, fangs sunk deep into his windpipe. And then magic returned. The overflow reached completion, and the ring on the dwarf's finger, the silver ring of the ruin, returned, scrolling with a band, and it broke with the sound of a silver bow. A spiraling blue light fell from above and enveloped them both, the corpse and the snake. There was a flash, and they were gone. I woke up woozy, dizzy. The overflow had been squeezed my soul through the ringer. You have created the blessing of the Earth Shaper. The minion granted this blessing received increased intelligence with the potential to grow over time, and limited affinity with earth magic. I brushed the notification away, uncaring. Arum was gone. I could sense him, oh, the dwarf, nowhere in my domain. Argent was clinging to the roots of the black tree, trying to escape from a large and unruly carp that was trying to sweep her down by kicking up waves of water. And Isis had an owl pinned to the ground, its wings twisted into a lock between the skinny arms. The priest stood with her arms up, surrendering. She stared out into nowhere in particular, but her blind eyes seemed to register that I was awake. Spirit of the dungeon, hear me. I would like to negotiate for the return of my owl. My first instinct was to kill her. My every instinct was to kill her. My sanctum had been breached, and an intruder had nearly enslaved me. My gardens were dust and ash, and I was crying out for bloody, satisfying vengeance. But no, I had to speak to her instead, had to calm myself. I needed to know where Arum had gone, because I was going to get him back. End of chapter and end of book 1. And that concludes this batch video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the channel, there are numerous ways to do so down below. Until next time, I hope that you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.